a merging of two people is an impossibility, and where it seems to exist, it is a hemming in, a mutual consent that robs one party or both parties of their fullest freedom and development. But once the realization is accepted that even between the closest people, infinite distances exist, a marvelous living side by side can grow up for them, if they succeed in loving the expanse between them, which gives them the possibility of always seeing each other as a whole and before an immense sky.
Jeez, real good.
It's really good. If you're happy with the same old ways of dating,
If you enjoy sucking at communication,
and you have no desire to improve your romantic life, then our podcast might not be for you.
but if you want some out-of-the-box ideas to deepen your current relationships,
broaden your sexual horizons,
develop a better understanding of yourself,
or learn more about non-monogamy,
Then you've come to the right place. I'm Jase,
I'm Emily.
and I'm Dedeker.
and this is the Multiamory podcast.
Songs I know I did, forcing me to form myself to fit.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're talking about dirty little secrets and their opposites. Big, clean privacy. Right? That's not where you thought I was going, huh? You thought it was going to be big, clean transparency or something. But no, this episode is focused on the difference between privacy and secrecy, right? Or secrets versus private things. What's that all about? And this is something that comes up a lot in marriage advice and in a lot of traditional monogamous dating advice, of this question of things like, is snooping okay? We've talked about in other episodes. But even just the idea of, do you have privacy at all? Are you an individual person at all? What are your rights to privacy in a relationship? And this is something going way back to the idea that, like, literally when you got married, well, the wife specifically didn't even have any legal rights to any property or privacy of her own, that literally anything that she did or had belonged to her husband. And unfortunately, even in modern conventional dating and marriage advice, we still see a lot of that kind of that idea, that philosophy about it trickling into the way that we talk about these things, which actually can be very troubling.
I find it interesting because you're saying conventional, and when I think of like the Mad Men era of things, like there still was this sort of normative thing of like, well, the Don Draper guy would have his privacy and have his secrets. But then, of course, like the Sally Draper, or no, not Sally, that was the daughter. Betty Draper, that's the
You're
one.
looking at me as though I would know anything
Okay,
whatsoever.
I loved that show. But yeah, anyways, that Betty would still have to keep everything out in the open for her husband, but that he could have some privacy and some secrets. So I appreciate that you said like the woman or the wife had to have more of the secrecy out in the open, or any privacy that she might have had previously out in the open. But obviously all of this sort of goes on its head when you're considering multiple partners. It is like a question of like, what factors do you have to consider in terms of privacy when there are multiple people involved? So things like, how do you respect the privacy of your partners to your other partners? So again, I know that when we were all dating, it was like, well, not everybody wants to know everything about the other person. And that's not like our thing to discuss if somebody doesn't want us to kind of disclose specific information. Also, like, there's always the question of hierarchy, power dynamics that come up with privacy. And then we wanted to kind of discuss like, what is the difference between privacy and secrecy? And is there really anything out there that is okay to hide from your partner?
Yeah, I guess the question that kind of we're getting at with this is, who gets to decide what is private and what's not, and in what situations, right? Like Emily's example of, what do you share about one partner with another? And it's that question of like, what is mine to share with my other partner versus what is someone else's privacy that I'm then infringing upon by that, right? It's kind of that, I think that question of what's yours to share is interesting. However, as we'll probably explore in this, it's possible to err on the other side of using like, well, it wasn't mine to share as an excuse for behavior that I would describe as being secretive or keeping secrets, which is a negative thing.
Yeah, so let's dive in a little bit more philosophically into the difference between privacy and secrecy. And I do want to, it's just interesting and curious to me that we even struggle with this at all in the context of romantic relationships. I think that in itself serves to be a flag of hey, we don't have everything quite figured out, because these are really common questions, even among people who are in very traditional, conventional monogamous relationships. And so, I really want to think about what does society tell us generally about privacy in relationships in general? I feel like my impression anyway is that we feel collectively a lot more clear about, for instance, issues of privacy in the workplace, of what are the things that it is okay to talk about, what's not okay to talk about. Of course, it's going to change.
Divulging pay or
things
raises
like that,
or things like that. Yeah.
And of course, that's going to be a little bit different from workplace to workplace, what the culture is there. So it's there's some arenas where we feel like privacy is pretty clearly defined, but then I do feel like in the arena of romantic relationships that there's a lot of questions around that. And I found this really fascinating quote, and this is specifically from a Time magazine article that was about the topic of privacy in relationships and how this is changing. It was an article written by Stephanie Ferryington, which I just love that name because it's like fairy, like a winged fairy. Yeah, so it's like
Ferryington.
You're just ferrying around in the town. Ferryington. Okay.
That's cute.
Anyway, she writes, so this derives from an antediluvian belief that marriage means a kind of merging that renders the very notion of privacy anathema or moot. If the idea of a quote-unquote private life outside marriage sounds oxymoronic, it's because we've so thoroughly romanticized the fusion of ourselves with our partners as a kind of testament to the depths of our intimacy. And now, Jase, you kind of previewed this a little bit ahead of time, this idea that marriage starts out as this very transactional contract, essentially, where, the wife essentially gets kind of subsumed by the husband or the husband's tribe or the husband's
Becomes
family.
part of the family, yeah.
Yes, and we already have all this language around two becoming one and this being a union. And so this idea that you would have some kind of individuality or a private life outside of that union is fundamentally preposterous.
Even taking a name, the husband's name is in essence getting rid of the individuality of a person and instead taking on, we used to say, Mrs. Bob Smith.
Yes.
Right.
Mr. and Mrs. Bob Smith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's why I think nowadays, as not only fewer of us are getting married, but I think now that our definitions of marriage is starting to evolve into something that's more about two individuals coming together as opposed to one monolith kind of subsuming this wife figure, into that monolith.
Sure.
I think that's why we start to have these questions around where are the boundaries? Where are the borders? What is okay to still maintain and have private individual as opposed to what's not? And now, actually, for me, I started thinking about this a lot a number of years ago when I was kind of in my more formative time thinking about hierarchy specifically. Because a lot of the resources and the people that I talked to who are very pro-hierarchy, it was very much from the standpoint of well, you need to make choices that prioritize the relationship.
A certain person, yeah.
Well, no, the relationship.
Oh,
and you as a couple are the deciding factor. You're the deciding unit. It's you as the couple, you work together to make decisions that prioritize the relationship. And on the one hand, I think yeah, that makes sense. On the one hand, I'm yes, you should be making, taking actions that prioritize your health as two human beings in a relationship to each other. However, on the other hand, I realized I was wait, but that assumes that it's possible to become essentially one flesh with another person. That assumes that we come together and we can function as a hive mind where we're always going to agree on the same thing and the same next step forward and that we're going to want the same things.
Or
and I was
simply, if you can't, that the relationship still will trump the individuality of two people and perhaps the wants and needs even of two individuals for the unit.
Yes. And so that was the thing I had a hard time wrapping my brain around was it's like, but you just like, you can't become a hive mind with another person. Like you just can't, like inevitably, even if you have the best of intentions in a relationship with someone, you're going to run up against a situation where you both want very different things and you're both going to have a very different opinion of what's good for the relationship or not. And like, that's okay. That's a normal relationship thing. But to say that like the union itself means that then you can kind of function in this way and you're always going to make the best choice that's the best for the relationship, I think is a little bit troublesome. And so...
Well, it's always like, what is the best?
Yes.
What does that even mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting part of the question right there is I think sometimes people can get caught up in like, well, is it about the individuals or is it about preserving the relationship and like what about commitment? But I think like underneath all of that is what does a good relationship actually mean? Right. And I think it's like getting down past that level of just like one person saying you're, not giving enough individual identity to the people in this relationship and the other person going, well, you're not committed enough to a relationship. Like that is, it's important to be part of something bigger than just the parts of it. But that underneath all of that, there's this question of just like what actually is good for that relationship and for those people involved and what really is the purpose of this. And I think it's such a tricky thing because we have a lot of emotional attachment to these things, right? Like that idea of becoming one flesh, that's very romanticized to us. And we don't generally think about things like the fact that under the law, coverture was the name for this. But under the law, like literally the woman stopped existing as a separate entity from her husband. They became one, except he was the head of the one, right?
He was more one than she was.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So she literally was like a part of him, right?
He was Adam and she was his rib.
Sure, yeah, we've got that imagery.
Sorry, we're
from
reading the Bible,
Yeah.
so I just had to throw that in there.
Yeah, like this example here from an article I was reading was talking about how if the husband did anything to her, right, injured her or raped her or something, she had no legal recourse because, quote, suing him would be akin to suing herself. Right, but, okay, so like we don't tend to think about that very dark side of this to become one. However, we have all this like romantic attachment that's given to us about the idea of like finding your soulmate or finding the one, someone who completes you, these sorts of things. And it's like, it's almost like you've been told over and over again that this is romantic and this is good. And so you're just like, yeah, it must
That's
be.
what I want, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that people will hear us being real logical about things and go, but you're taking the romance out of it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, like the romance is there just because you were told it was.
Yeah, exactly. Let's put some thought into this.
It's this whole, okay, to bring it back to the idea of privacy is that it's like, if you have this very romantic notion of like, we become one person, there's no barriers between us whatsoever. There's total free flow of information. That means that we cannot hold on to the hallmarks of ourselves being individuals. That in theory, that means you share absolutely everything and your partner shares absolutely everything with you. And that's like the most romantic version possible.
Yeah.
And like, even when I hear it, like, I still think there's a part of it that still feels romantic. I think that I tend to latch more onto the side of like, oh, how romantic the idea that, this person sees you warts and all and loves every bit of you.
That is a nice part of it. But the question is, if they do know everything about you, are they going to still love every single inch of who you are? Well, yeah, but that's, I think, a thing, because, some of the articles that we read, I really, really liked that one from, it was the Jewish, I'm not sure, but it was it was so good. And it was talking about like how, things might come up that will bug or hurt like a person. And, if you're at a dinner party and all of a sudden like, a friend brings something up that like is hard for the wife to hear or hard to talk about. And then the husband will be like, hey, we don't talk about that in house. Like, we're going to need to change the subject because that's something that we don't discuss here. Even if he himself doesn't exactly know why that is so challenging for her, like he kind of aids her in that private part of herself. And I really loved that point that they were trying to make. It was quite beautiful.
Yeah, the let's see, where was the quote?
Oh, are you
here?
finding it? Yeah.
I guess I don't have that particular quote, but there was one part of that article where he was talking about kind of the role of a husband and wife is to protect the other person's privacy, rather than to invade it and demand that it be accessible to them at all times.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah,
and I mean,
it
of
was
course,
great.
like swap out husband and wife for like whatever
whomever,
configuration.
This was
you
written
want.
on a fairly traditional, liberal but traditional Jewish theology website, I think. So anyway,
great,
obviously from more of that traditional marriage point of view, but I like that idea of and kind of like Emily's example of saying like, you know, we don't talk about that, rather than joining in the like prying and demanding.
Of being like, what is it? You know, which I've definitely heard that narrative as well. Like, we know that you don't like talking about that, but come on, like, you need to be vulnerable in this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to talk about a poet?
Can I read you a poem?
Oh,
I mean,
it
a part
is
of
a
a
poem?
poem.
Is it a poem that you wrote?
It is not a poem that I
That would be
wrote.
impressive.
That would be quite impressive if I wrote this poem. So this is by Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke.
One of my favorites.
Is that how you say it?
Yeah, German poet from some time ago. This is from Letters to a Young Poet. So a little bit longish.
His seminal work.
Yes.
Yeah.
The point of marriage is not to create a quick commonality by tearing down all boundaries. On the contrary, a good marriage is one in which each partner appoints the other to be the guardian of his solitude, and thus they show each other the greatest possible trust. A merging of two people is an impossibility, and where it seems to exist, it is a hemming in, a mutual consent that robs one party or both parties of their fullest freedom and development. But once the realization is accepted that even between the closest people, infinite distances exist, a marvelous living side by side can grow up for them, if they succeed in loving the expanse between them, which gives them the possibility of always seeing each other as a whole and before an immense sky.
Jeez, Rilke.
It's really good.
It's really nice.
It's so good. Yeah. But it's also just, again, like that article said, it's essentially caring for a person regardless of the things about them that you may question or may not necessarily be as fond of, or be like, why do they keep that from me? Why do they keep that from people? Instead, just accepting them as they are. And I think that's, wow, like how many people in our life can we say do that actually for us? I guess that's the goal.
If
there is a goal, then that is it.
There is a goal, yeah.
Hashtag
Maybe for
relationship
me,
goals. Yeah.
Well, this quote reminds me of actually something that a Buddhist teacher told me once, and it was within like the context of a private counseling session that I was having with this person, and I was kind of in the midst of NRE, but it was kind of NRE that was on the cusp of like the rude awakening, when you're starting to see that this person's an actual person, and maybe it hurts a little bit for both of you. And anyway, I was just like, you know, so torn up, because I'm like, I really love this person, I really want to be close to them, but it feels scary, you know, yada yada yada. But this teacher, she told me, you know, like when we do open our hearts to someone, it's not the traditional sense of like two hearts merging together and becoming one. It's, you know, two hearts who've kind of learned to respect the other heart's solitude. She was also very poetic.
Wow. Were you like,
yeah, basically. I was like mind blown. I wrote it down, and yeah, that's stuck with me ever since then. And I will say it's challenging for me because the fact that I'm someone, when I enter into relationship in general, I tend to be pretty reserved. I tend to play my cards pretty close to the chest. I tend to be a pretty private and not a very open person. And I try to counteract that. You know, I try to be more vulnerable and like open myself up to people. However, I have also been criticized for that from some people saying that I'm too closed off, or I'm not open enough, or there's things that I'm not sharing. And I've always felt like I've struggled with that, struggled between sometimes being like, oh God, they're right. Like, I just need to not be so private. I need to open myself up. I need to lay it all out on the table. And sometimes other times being like, no,
Fuck
it's
you.
okay. It's okay for me to have some privacy. It's okay for me to have some things that are reserved. Or it's okay for me to not want to like talk about absolutely everything all at once.
Yeah.
To quote a show that we're all familiar with the last 5 years, that line, all that I ask for is one little corner, one private room at the back of my heart. That line,
Oh,
I
my
want to
freaking
get that
God.
line tattooed on my forehead or
it's so
somewhere.
Maybe not. It's a long
Symbolically,
line.
metaphorically tattooed, because I
It's
like
really good.
I relate to it so much. This idea of like, yes, I want to love someone, but I also feel like I need somewhere in my heart that is like just for me.
Tell her I found one. She sends out battalions
To claim it and blow it apart. Yes.
Yikes.
Oh God, that's such a good song.
Yikes. I know. That was my favorite song to sing in that show when I played Jamie.
It's a beautiful song. But anyway, I so relate to that. But I feel like that's always been my struggle, is because, I think we've romanticized this notion of like when you're with someone, you just like lay everything out there and lay it all bare.
Yeah.
And anything less means that like you're not committed or you're scared or whatever. And sometimes for me that's true, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah. I mean, I want to kind of delve into that question of like secrecy versus privacy, because I think that, as you were saying, that's something that you sort of question. And it's like, well, what things am I holding close to the chest just because, well, I don't want to be vulnerable, or I don't want to put myself out there, or, this is something that I don't want people to know about me, versus like, this is a trauma, or this is a thing in my life that I need to keep close to myself because I don't want everyone to know about it. So yeah, I think what differentiates between a secret and something that's private is sometimes about intent, about like a possibility of something affecting someone or hurting someone else.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, like, private things can, if they are eventually told to a person, they can kind of give some sort of insight into who that person is and like what they've been through, things that that make them tick in a way that maybe like immediately you wouldn't know about them.
Yeah, I mean, like, there is something, like we're not trying to say in all of this that the most romantic relationship is one where you never share anything and you're totally private.
Sure.
Right? It's that sharing of private stuff like is very intimate and does give you insights into this person, and over the course of knowing someone, you will get to know more of those private things, especially if you show yourself to be a person who can be trusted with that kind of private information. Not only just trusted not to share it, but also trusted not to attack them for it, or to, shame them for it. Or exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. They were talking in some of the articles that we read, like private things are like unobserved things versus hidden things that
Like
may be
actively hidden.
Yeah, actively hidden, or actively, I guess, things that might actively harm or hurt another person, which often can be like those things that we would construe as being secret. And also, like, if you're hiding something out of fear of like what it will do to another person, what it might do to you if that thing were told, then perhaps that could be construed as a secret versus private.
Yeah, I think that's a hard metric to go by, because on the one hand, I'm like, well, there's some like private things about myself that the idea of sharing them feels scary. Like I feel fearful, but more because of, like, I'm afraid of how it's going to reflect on me, or I'm afraid of having to just talk about
or like
emotional, vulnerable things. But then at the same time, I can also hold a secret where it's like, because I'm afraid that this is going to have a huge impact on this person, or I'm afraid that they're going to leave me, or I'm afraid that, I don't know. So I feel like there can be fear with both of them.
But it feels like one thing is more directed inward as opposed to outward.
Yeah,
because you just said that you were like, I'm afraid that someone might leave me, or that they will think of me differently if they knew it, versus like, I don't know if I personally want to go there, want a person, or even want to like relive the experience that is private to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a fine line sometimes.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah, and so this definitely isn't something that we can like define and be like, if it meets these characteristics, it's a secret and it's bad, or if it's these, then it's private and it's okay, because it really does depend on context, right? That there are things that, and we're going to try to get into kind of more specific examples of some things in the second half of this episode, but stuff where in one context with one person in your life, this might just be private. It's like, this is about me. This is something about me. I don't know if I want to share it or not, but it's private. Versus in another situation, right at the same time, but with a different person, that might be something you're keeping from them that does directly have an effect on their life. And that you could make the argument that you are causing them harm or setting them up for future harm by not telling them this thing, by actively keeping it secret.
Yeah.
Right.
So
like
kind of like setting someone else up for harm directly or indirectly by not telling them.
Right. And I feel like that's kind of one of those things that it's not just like this thing is always private and so it's okay to keep it to yourself and this thing's always not. But it does depend on the situation, on how it affects their life, how you, I guess, know this information, like what that understanding is about how much you would communicate with them, which is why we always try to encourage people to be as explicit as possible with each other about what types of things we do want to know and not, or what things we expect to tell each other in a timely manner versus what things are okay to just as they come up, like especially in terms of other partners and what you do with them. For some people, that might feel like you kept a secret because you didn't tell me that you had sex with this person last night. And for another person, it would be like, oh no, that's your private business. That's fine with me.
Yeah.
If I asked you and you said no, then that would have been
like
a lie.
Yeah.
And then it feels bad. So it's like having a clearer expectation can help make that distinction clearer about what's private versus what's a secret.
Yeah.
But sometimes we can just fall into not having those conversations just because they're uncomfortable, or we want to, I don't know, maybe we're just too afraid to have them.
Yeah. So there's a great blog called Young at Heart, as in Carl Jung. And on this blog, there was a cool quote that we're going to read you right now. It is, "We keep something secret because we believe the cost of telling is so high that it's virtually not a choice at all. Privacy is voluntary, secrecy is not."
I think that's really interesting.
Yeah,
I think you could definitely debate that one, but
I agree,
that is a really interesting observation of that part of what motivates a person to keep a secret is this perception of like, there's just no way that I could tell because the cost is so high. And so I don't have any choice.
Yeah.
But to keep it a secret.
Yeah. In that same article, she mentioned some quotes from Carl Jung, who is talking about like keeping secrets. It kind of has this like psychological damage that it does to you over time, like to yourself, like this psychological harm you're causing yourself by keeping a secret.
Yeah.
And so it's that like the pain of divulging it versus sort of the pain you're causing yourself by keeping it secret. Again, debatable, but it is kind of an interesting way to think about it. Like that is an interesting way to sort of gain some introspection into like, how do I really feel about this thing? How do I come down on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I think that is an interesting invitation to analyze yourself and look inward and kind of see if you can really get real with yourself, I suppose, and be like, this thing, does it feel more like a secret or does it feel more like privacy? And that, I think that requires a very high level of being honest with yourself,
Sure.
To be able to be like, actually, like this feels like I'm hanging on to a secret more so than the
that's
privacy.
some next level shit, but definitely important to question within oneself.
Yeah.
So we're going to, in the second half of this episode, talk about things that you might want to keep private, things that you might not want to keep secret, and then kind of what happens if you screw up and invade someone's privacy, what to do in those scenarios.
So we came up with a couple lists of just suggestions. And I'm going to give the disclaimer first and foremost that these are just suggestions from us. These things are going to differ depending on your situation, depending on your needs, depending on your context, depending on your level of safety. So please do not take this list as this is like the official black and white Multiamory list of these are the things you keep private and these are the things that you tell to the world.
You have to do that.
Please do not interpret it that way. These are just kind of some guidelines that may change depending on your circumstances.
Yeah. So, okay, some things that you might want to keep private. The first one definitely falls under that category of like, this is based on your specific situation, but something that you might want to keep private is the STI statuses of specific people in your life without their consent. With their consent, if you feel like, that's something that everyone has agreed upon talking about to multiple partners, then that's one thing. But without the consent, definitely don't just assume that this is a thing that somebody would be comfortable with.
Yeah, can we talk about this one for a moment?
Please.
Because I think this one's big.
Well, we are
I
going to talk
agree.
about it again a little later before
We
people
are.
send us angry emails about
No.
saying about keeping it private.
Yeah.
Well, okay, sure. We'll talk about it later then.
Well,
Okay.
Okay.
So for example, as in, it could be anything of like your best friend discloses their STI status to you and you just go ahead and blab that to your
And
partner.
you're like, oh my God, guess
Like,
what?
guess who has what or whatever, or could be, between your partners. And again, before you send us angry emails and tweets, we are going to be addressing disclosure of sexual health later on in this episode. So just hang tight.
No, yeah. Okay, another thing that you might want to keep private are people or partners sharing of past trauma that they had in their lives. Again, yeah. I think this one is pretty explanatory. Like, that's probably not something that you're going to want to go blabbing to other people about.
but
Again,
people do
like,
100%.
No,
Yes.
totally.
With partners, there's like this assumption that anything that's told to me, I can
means
tell
that
to my
like
partner.
everybody else gets to know. Yeah.
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 And some people are more on the blabbing spectrum than others. But that is something that people assume. And it's definitely something I assume too. It's like, well, yeah, but they're the person it's okay to share stuff with because they're my romantic partner.
Yeah.
And somehow that doesn't count
Somehow
as telling
that's
someone
okay.
else.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. Again, other people's physical or mental health statuses, issues. Yeah. Anything that goes along with that. That's probably not something that you would want to divulge to your partners, to your friends, to your family.
Again, unless they've given you consent
yes.
that like this is okay to talk about, or they themselves are like very open in public
Yes.
about.
But don't just
Yes.
assume automatically. I'd say ask the question before assuming that it's okay to go out and tell other people about things that are happening with your partner.
Yeah, I've even read some stuff where people talk about it's also your right to keep private your own physical or mental health issues.
Yeah.
If it's not something that's going to, cause harm to your partner, that isn't something you're actually required to tell them about if you don't want to.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting one that a lot of times as neurotypical and physically able people, we don't think about.
Yeah.
But that is something that if it's not affecting them, you don't necessarily have to tell them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Things like correspondence or emails or text messages that were shared under assumed confidence. Something really intense happened with, your mother or whatever. And then all of a sudden you go and like blab about that to another partner. Then perhaps, yeah, that's not an okay thing. Again, without consent. Not something that you should just assume you can do.
Yeah, that assumed confidence is such an interesting
Yeah.
qualifier. You know what I mean?
Assumed confidence. I mean, that is hard. That's something I think everyone should err on the side of caution. I can tell myself to do this far more as well.
Yeah, I was going to say me too. I think
Yeah.
I need to be better about this one.
Yeah, but just the fact that like in a relationship, especially if it's potentially something traumatic in any way, to err on the side of caution and say like, hey, like maybe I'm gonna let so and so tell you about this instead of me telling you about it, even if like that your friend or your metamor is like having a big talk with their partner and you're like, oh, how did it go with that person? If you were to say like, hey, I know what happened, but I'm going to let them talk to you about it instead of me divulging their private conversation.
I really like that actually when I came across
I think
that
you do that a
phrasing.
lot and it's great, Jase.
That phrasing of I actually had someone say, gosh, where was it? We were at some sort of polyamory meetup or a discussion group or something, and someone was talking to me about Dedeker and was asking some question about her and maybe even about Emily too. I can't remember if it was about my relationship with Dedeker or if it was about us as a podcast. But they were asking kind of our opinions on something. And I didn't even like think I was doing something big at the time, but I was like, well, you'd have to ask them to get like their specific opinions, but this is mine and I'm pretty sure they agree with me, but you should talk to them and find out for sure.
That's great.
And this person told me later, they were like, that blew my mind. They were like, that was so cool. And I just hadn't even considered that before. So I did think that idea of like, I guess, whose is this to share, or, you know, kind of what information can I speak on with authority versus what can't I?
Right.
Yeah. Again, we'll just continue on this list. So things like relationship problems or communication issues that don't have an effect on other people or partners, probably keep that to yourself. Again, I mean, I think this is difficult because I think that friends do this a lot, and then even potentially multiple partners can do this. Like if there are communication issues, if there are specific issues within the relationship, you might go like try to talk to your other partners about it and try to get like some good advice even. And it can be a little bit, it can just be, you know, like, oh, I need some advice and you're my friend and I'm going to talk to you about it. But that can be negative in a lot of ways. And that can be a thing that causes your other partners to be like, I don't like this person because all that you talk to me about them is, you know, their shitty communication habits. And so that's definitely something to maybe be mindful of, that potential.
Well, I think it really means needing to be mindful of what are the things that are going on in my life or with this, you know, in this one relationship that's affecting my other relationship or other partner versus what's not, you know, because there's a difference between like, oh, I don't know, like myself and this partner, we get into arguments about level of cleanliness in the house all the time, but that literally has like zero impact on my other partner. So like, so I don't need to dredge that up about to like vent about it or gossip about it or whatever. With the advice thing, that's also a little bit difficult. I feel like that's kind of a context dependent situation. But versus if I have some like ongoing fights or like ongoing systemic communication issues with a partner and it's like really bumming me out and it means that I'm really distracted when I go hang out with my other partner or I'm really stressed or angry or whatever, then it's kind of like that's starting to spill over into the rest of your life.
But I guess then also the question of how specific are you in what you're sharing about someone else? Like what's yours to share? The fact that I'm having a communication issue, that's mine to share. But what specifically might be going on for my partner maybe isn't. It just depends.
Even if they're like having a ton of shit happened at work or they just got laid off or something like that, and that's causing a communication issue or causing them to maybe be shittier than normal. I don't even know, you know, for an example. But maybe that's not necessarily yours to tell. So
it's hard to come down.
It's a case by case basis for sure. Okay, and then finally the last one that of things that you might want to keep private that we have. There are probably many others, but your other partner's specific sexual preferences, fetishes, or interests. I mean, that's definitely kind of one to keep private. That's not something that you should just go blabbing.
Expands to also if like friends as well share with you their sexual preferences or fetishes or whatever, that's also not something to necessarily just talking about whoever.
I think this one's so interesting too because for some people that you know, they might be like, yeah, of course. Like I talk about that with anyone. Like go ahead and talk about it. And even for you, like you might be the person who's like, oh, that's whatever. Like no one would judge anyone for that. Or if they did, fuck them. Like, so I would say that to whoever and you can tell that to whoever. And so you might share that thing with a friend. And then your partner is super upset about that, right? Like they feel very betrayed. Like you've revealed something that they're not okay with sharing. Whereas for you, it's no big deal, right? I think that's a big one. I did want to add to this one is stuff like other people's gender identity. Or like their gender history or sort of their gender story, aside from just like, this is my friend who uses these pronouns, but like giving whatever backstory about them might not be yours to share, right? Again, you want to know, like talking to them, ask them, hey, if I talk to someone, is that okay that I mention that? Would you prefer to keep it secret? What is it? If that is someone who you're close enough to ask those sorts of things. Otherwise, just let them be the one who shares that themselves.
Yeah, definitely. So again, that was just our list of suggestions. As you can tell from the way we discussed it, a lot of these things are debatable. A lot of these things can be context specific. So these are just kind of some general guidelines. And we also wanted to talk about some things that you may not want to keep a secret. And coming in at number 1,
The opposite of the other thing that we just talked about.
again, deja vu, STI status, particularly when it affects other people. So again,
Is this more specific to you?
what do you mean?
Like meaning like your own personal STI status?
I think that definitely counts.
Yeah.
I think that definitely counts, because your own personal STI status is going to affect the people that you choose to have sex with or choose to have some kind of sexual contact with. There was a recent discussion about this in the patron group of like, how do I maintain open communication in order to preserve and help uphold everyone's sexual health, but also not violate people's privacy? Because some people are like, yeah, this is my status, or I have, HSV2, or I have this or I have that, but I don't want you to necessarily go around and tell everyone.
Yeah.
And so some people came up with some interesting creative solutions. Some people said that they really try to get ahead of it by just early on in a relationship, say like, hey, just so you know, like, this is kind of my risk profile when it comes to having sex. Like, I'm willing to sleep with people who have such and such STIs, provided that we use barriers, for instance, as an example, so that this person just knows, like, okay,
There's a
I don't know
possibility that that's
specifically if there's
occurring.
someone in your polycule that has, is positive for something or not, but I just know that, like, if that's the case, then that's what your choices as far as how you manage that risk. And that's going to be different for different people. So that works in some situations. Other people pointed out that it's like, well, if you only have like 2 people in your polycule and you're just like, I'm sleeping, someone has
Out there might-
HPV,
Yeah.
and they're like, well, we can kind of narrow it down, know, so that approach doesn't necessarily work for other people. This is definitely a kind of thing where if you're not sure, of course, just like communicate more than you think that you do. Like, ask the person who disclosed their STI status to you, let them know like, hey, this is something that I feel like is important to convey to my other partner that I'm having sex with. You know, what's the best way that you would like me to convey that to this person? So it may be something that also needs to be negotiated. But the solution is not, let's not talk about it and keep it secret in any regard.
Right. I did want to go into that a little more, of that thing of, there's one thing to say, like, ask them about how they would prefer that you shared that with your partners or whatever. But if your situation is one where either because of your own personal values or because of an established agreement that you have with an existing partner, that this is something that you will disclose to them, this is something you talk about before you have the sex with the new partner. And that's the part that I think a lot of people miss, because they're like, oh, well, I made my decision. I had sex with them and they don't want me to tell. Like, they're just not comfortable with that. So then I'm not going to, and I'm justifying it by saying, well, they didn't want to. But to my other partner, that is a secret. That's a betrayal, because that's something they expect me to share.
And it's also something that affects them.
And it's something that affects them, right? So having that, kind of actually having the responsibility to at the time be like, okay, like that is fine with me. This is something that I will want to disclose to my partner if we do have sex. If we don't, or if we don't have certain types of sex, whatever your agreement is. If we don't, obviously I'm not going to tell them because that's none of their business. But, if, kind of to be as upfront as possible about that is something I feel like a lot of people just forget that option exists. Of just like being that explicit about it. I think people like to pretend it doesn't exist because that one involves a situation where you don't have sex.
That's true. That's true. That is true. Well, I feel like just in general, having discussions very early on about how disclosure works in your relationships is an important, really intentional conversation to have with people, just so that they know, So again, another thing you may not necessarily want to keep secret. And notice how I stuttered and said not three times, just really emphasize it.
Triple negative?
Not. Some things that you may not want to keep secret. One of those things are your personal boundaries. and this is also tricky because sometimes with our boundaries, it's an ongoing process of learning about them.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't learn about them until they're bumped up against. They're like, ooh, wow, that's a boundary. Didn't know. Still best to not keep it to yourself. Do what you can to express these things proactively, have conversations about these things with your partners or with the people close to you. Other things you may not want to keep secret, your future plans, your dreams, your hopes, do you
Even for the relationship.
Yeah, for the relationship itself, or like, do you see yourself wanting to, land a job in a particular field and moving across the country? Or do you see yourself wanting to have 5 kids someday or no kids? Or, those are things that I know that everyone always gets kind of turned off by like, oh, you can't discuss those things like so early on in a relationship. People will get scared thinking that you're like trying to get them to marry them or something like that. There's ways to talk about your future plans and your future intentions without it being a weird, creepy, like, I've tracked out the next 20 years of our relationship, even though we've only been on 2 dates. There are ways to talk about it.
And then in year 5 is when we moved to our new house in Provence.
Provence.
Yes. Other things that you may not want to keep secret, talking about what kind of relationship structure you want to have. And again, this is another one that I think requires a really high level of self-honesty.
Yeah.
And self-awareness of, for instance, I know some people who are like, well, I'm okay to be non-monogamous now, but eventually, like, I do feel like I would probably, once I get older, maybe once I want to have kids or whatever, I'd kind of want to settle down and maybe be monogamous again. And like, that's great, just talk about that. Or people who feel the opposite of like, I kind of want to be monogamous now, but I would love to see us open up later on and then have it look this particular way. And that's okay. Just don't keep that no secret.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Another one that we've talked about before on this podcast is sharing how you feel about your other partners. And this specifically tends to come up when you're really falling heavily for someone or you are really into them.
Or even if you just have gone on like a first date.
Well, yeah, I'm not even talking about their existence, but just like how you feel about them.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, like, we've talked about this, Jase, like how people would go on first dates and then come home and be like, I don't know, it was okay. Whatever.
Right, kind of downplaying it.
Downplaying it instead of being like, you know what, I had a really great time.
Or I've also seen with someone that you're just going on, the first few dates with, of kind of trying to like downplay the seriousness of your existing relationships if they're someone who's new to polyamory because you don't want to freak them out. And it's just that never ends up serving you or them. Like really, this is just setting both of you up for a lot more hurt down the road. So just don't like be as honest and clear about that as possible and respect other people to make their own decisions about that instead of making the decision of like making the decision of whether or not they want to be in a relationship with you rather than making that your decision. That's their decision. I guess if I want to get super, abstract about it. Another one would be addiction or substance abuse problems for yourself. Again, not sharing those about other people necessarily unless you're in a situation where you're in danger or something and are looking for help, obviously. But yeah, sharing those is, it's the first step. That's how you can work on that. And that is also something that arguably can affect them very seriously as well. Yeah. Let's see, what do we have next here? So your own physical illnesses or mental health issues that do have an effect on people close to you.
We had this also, in the other categories.
Yeah.
So, I mean, use your discretion, I think, with this one. Again, if there are certain things like, I'm dyslexic or something, and you're like, I don't necessarily need to tell anyone that. That can be a private thing. It's not going to necessarily hurt or harm anyone that you're dating to know that. And if you want to keep that private, then I think that's probably fine. But
yeah, like it can fall into that category of stuff that's private that when you do share it with them, it's about building intimacy and connection rather than something you're sharing because you have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last one we have on this list here is just about other relationships that you maintain contact with or that you stay in contact with, whether platonic or romantic, but just if there's a person who's significant enough in your life that you maintain regular contact with them, even if that regular is only once every couple months or something, that to just like leave that person out from a partner who is kind of a more established partner who does know a lot more about the goings on in your life. That's one of those things that's like, I guess Dedeker's favorite, don't tie your shoes in a watermelon field kind of situation where even if there's nothing untoward going on, you don't want to do something that's going to give the appearance of that. That just doesn't make sense, So just try to be upfront and be honest about those
I think
things.
also if you're noticing that there's some kind of relationship in your life that you feel the impulse to be more secretive about or to not talk to your partner about, just get curious about that of like, why is that?
Yeah, that's a great,
is there some kind of
example.
fear there? Is there some kind of fear of some reaction from a partner or whatever? Just kind of follow that as a little clue, essentially. A little clue to dig a little deeper and get a little more information about yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
So, y'all, how can we fuck this up?
So many ways.
God knows we all
done it,
have.
yeah.
We've all fucked it up many times. We talked, we sprinkled in some examples as we talked about this, but things like sharing information that wasn't yours to share. Again, sometimes, we're so socialized to assume that it's like, well, if I'm in a close romantic relationship with someone, it's okay to share whatever with them. All the gossip about my friends or other partners or whatever, because we don't keep anything from each other and it's so romantic. But just that. So sometimes because of that habit, I know I've definitely shared stuff and not even realized till later, like, ooh, actually, maybe I shouldn't have talked about that. Maybe that was a little bit of a violation or going a little too far. Sometimes you can fuck it up accidentally by accidentally eavesdropping or happening to see a message on someone's phone or on their computer or whatever. There can be an unintentional fuck up here of like kind of just becoming part of some kind of private correspondence by accident. And then on the opposite side, you can choose to not share something that does actually need to be shared. We can tell lies of omission as well. And we talked about some of those already. We can go even more egregious, such as Emily wrote here, snooping and duping, which we decided snooping, fairly obvious, snooping when you're intentionally going in and like digging through a partner's private things, private text, private email, stuff like that. And we decided that duping was then
duping them.
Well, was
like
then
they're duped.
Was then to go and pretend like you didn't snoop, but still kind of get mad at your partner anyway, or like pretend to find out some kind of incriminating information through another way.
But then it's actually
But actually, it's because you snooped and then you
duped
duped
your partner.
Snooping and duping.
I think things like demanding information from a partner. I've been guilty of this because I've definitely fallen prey to this idea of like, if I just know everything about a situation, or if I just know everything about a partner, if I just know everything about my partner's other partner, then I won't be surprised. I can't be caught off guard. I can stay in control of the situation.
Interesting.
That's definitely where some like hierarchy and power dynamics come into play. I know it did for me.
Back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day, of this idea of like, well, if I'm the one who knows the most information, then I can be in control.
Then I have the most power.
Yeah, because then if this person's privacy gets sacrificed to me, then I have the most power, essentially.
That was something that was brought up in one of the articles we were reading for this too, is that idea that that basically like you maintain power by not letting other people know everything about you, and that you try to take power from people by trying to get all their information by like, and it makes really the argument of like a peeping Tom. Yeah. It's about like having power over that person because you're getting to insight into them that they didn't want to give you, right? And it's sort of as a way of having power over someone. I just thought it was an interesting kind of philosophical way to look at that I hadn't really considered before.
That is interesting.
But it fits with what you were just saying right there.
Yeah. So when you do fuck up, what happens? What do you do then? And it's interesting because we try to find some good like information on this. And when you type in like what do you do when when you invade someone's privacy, and automatically it's like, it talks about, okay, well, when your privacy is invaded on Facebook, or when, here's how to sue for invasion of privacy and
As
stuff
in
like
when you're
that.
the victim of a
exactly.
privacy
And I'm
invasion.
like, okay, clearly there's not a lot of information or good information out there.
You know what? This
Yes?
just sparked a memory for me that way back in the day when we did the episode on snooping.
Yeah, which
You know,
in which James?
James.
We said James again. Dedeker said James earlier. There's
Earlier today, for
Really?
some reason, I accidentally called someone James also.
And
It's
you were like,
what
So
who's
it's not me
James?
though.
no,
Someone
it wasn't
else.
you. It was someone else. There's the spirit of James is
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
infiltrate the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
We're on to you, James.
I
Yeah.
know. Who are you? But Jase, what did he say?
Yeah.
What was I? What?
What did he say? What did he do?
Oh, if you want to snoop, keep your
That's the-
partner in the loop.
Yes.
But you made your cool, very
t-shirt.
cool
Your 90s t-shirt. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, way back in the day when we made that episode, I think I posted on the polyamory subreddit asking people for their experiences of when you've snooped on someone or invaded someone's privacy, how did you rectify that with your partner, or how did you, the two of you, heal that, or how did you come to terms with it? And a lot of people responded with well, when I snooped on my partner, I found that they were doing this and that,
Yeah,
and then
and
I
I was
broke up
in
with
the
them, and it
right.
was okay. And
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
it is this kind of weird, ends justify the means.
Well, exactly.
But
It's not saying that, okay, well, maybe, yes, something occurred that was not good, but I also was in the wrong in a way. And again, if you go and try to find something and do find something, but it's not break upable,
Well, okay.
then what does that mean?
Well, my argument though is that, okay, so you went snooping on your partner, you found something where you're like, oh, this is unacceptable. Maybe they've been cheating on me or lying to me or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to confront them and break up with them. I'm like, there was some other indicator that probably got you to snoop in the first place.
Probably.
Right?
I'm
There was
assuming.
some other evidence. There were probably other opportunities for
maybe.
conversation or confrontation.
Or is it just I'm really insecure right now, and so I'm gonna do something self-sabotage
that
in a
happens
way.
too. People do that too.
Yeah, to go and try to get, do a gotcha on my partner
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
But anyways, in those instances, in my opinion, when people do have a moment of I snooped, or I fucked up, or I accidentally told something in the heat of the moment about my partner's partner, and that is fucking this whole privacy thing up. What do? Well, first of all, apologize to the parties that were involved and were hurt by this. Admit to the wrongdoing.
Yeah,
Yes?
well, didn't we talk about on some other episode about how the longer amount of time that goes by without fessing up to something or coming clean about something,
The worse it is.
the more negative the impact is.
Yeah.
The worse the betrayal of trust
Yes.
becomes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it was. It was on the trust episode.
So maybe try to admit and apologize immediately as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as
Yeah.
you realize that because what I've found at least is that in the times when I have, kind of earlier on been hey, there's this thing that I'm starting to feel like I'm keeping from you, for example, rather than even on the snooping side, on the other side, that I feel like I've been keeping from you, and I don't think that I should, but for whatever reason I have been, and I just wanted to be sure that wasn't something that I was keeping from you. That a lot of the times, especially the earlier on that is, oftentimes the reaction's oh, yeah, okay, whatever, that's fine. I wasn't even concerned about that. Or it's just a casual okay, oh, cool, thanks, yeah, that's good to know, because I would have worried about that, so I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah.
Whereas those times when it's well, I'm too afraid of that, and so I just wait to this point where now it feels really bad. Now there's this other, whatever it is, a friend or something that I did this one weekend that I've now kept from my partner for a year. And then to talk about it, it's wait, what?
I'm going to say, wait, what? Because I got a little lost on your syntax there.
No, I mean,
Wait,
yeah.
what was the weekend? The weekend? What?
If you slept with someone
Okay.
on a weekend and then didn't tell
Or
your partner about it for a year,
Right.
or
I'm saying something
you
even
found,
more innocuous.
or you found out that I don't know, that your partner's partner slept with someone and then you told your partner about it and then didn't tell the original partner that you told your partner.
Okay, that wasn't confusing at all. No, I was even thinking of something like I was out doing this thing and I ended up going and like getting drunk with my friends. We went out and got drunk and I didn't tell you that that's what I did that night.
Oh.
If it's like then a couple days later, like, hey, actually, like this is what I did. That's one thing versus now months later.
By the way, you remember that day that I did this thing that I said that I did?
Right.
I didn't.
Yeah. Assuming that, you did just sort of in the moment, like you kind of lied about it or you misrepresented it.
Yeah.
It's like realize you did it and fess up to it and come clean sooner is going to be better than waiting till later. And then it feels like, even if it was nothing, it's like, well, why were you keeping it then?
Yeah.
And I think it's something that we can just do. We can just sort of like lie on impulse or not share something for like not even a good reason.
Yeah.
And then end up in trouble because of it when we really didn't need to. Like we cause ourselves a lot of suffering over nothing.
It's funny because I think I was listening to a talk
Buddhism.
to a lecture that Kathy Labriola was giving where she talked about the fact, I don't know, her approach on it was interesting because she mentioned, she's like, first of all, accept the fact that like in relationships, everyone lies at some point. And often it's like lies out of habit or lies on impulse, or sometimes it's like lies that are told.
Fear in the moment.
Yeah, fear in the moment before we even realize that we've told a lie.
Yeah.
And the name of the game is like, can you then catch yourself? Can you either be like, do you have the bravery to be like, you know what? I'm really sorry. Like, that was a lie. Like that was a lie of impulse. I was afraid. Like this is actually the truth, which is like definitely takes some guts.
For sure.
Or can you even better like catch yourself before? Can you be like, you know what? I just had the impulse to not tell you the truth. And that's scary. However, I do think that is such a good seed for a very important conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it can even be something like, I know like a similar thing that we've talked about in the past has had this reaction. And I was worried about a similar reaction. Can we talk about that? So, it, for better or for worse, like not that it makes it okay, but because of that, I was like, fuck, I want to lie to you or not tell you something.
Right. Well, I think that's an important part of, something that you can do if there's been some kind of breach or some kind of fuck up. It is important to have a conversation about, okay, how do we not let something like this happen again? What can we put in place to prevent it from happening again? And I know something that I've tried to be good about is when I have an experience of a partner. I haven't had a lot of experiences of partners like straight up lying to me in the recent history, which is great. Yay for me.
Good for you. Yeah. No.
More that like my experiences have been with like someone telling me something like later than I thought that they would, or like kind of these like half-truths or things like that. And, I used to get really upset. I still do, like still upsetting, but I've also tried to take the tact of like just straight up asking in a compassionate and not like aggressive way, but kind of straight up asking like, have I, is there something that I could be doing to create an environment that feels safer to talk about these things sooner? Or is there something specific that I have done that's made you not feel safe? Or is there a specific way I've reacted that's made you not feel safe?
That's a really impressive thing to put out there, because I think so many people will want to get super defensive in the moment and be like, well, why would you lie to me? Or like, what, instead of
it is hard because trust me, like,
of course, but instead of asking those questions and being like, hey, like, I recognize here that your decision to do this in the moment was probably caused by something. And what was that? Can we have a conversation about that? And I recognize that I might partially be to blame for that decision.
Right.
Which again, I mean, that is our next thing here, which is just essentially saying like on either side of it, like don't blame. Instead, like use nonviolent communication, like Dedeker just described,
or whatever.
Yeah, and
kind of communication technique or hack.
Yeah, nonviolent is like not a thing anymore. But but basically just to explain or discuss what occurred in the moment. And And then also, discuss like how to move forward, how to maybe not let something like that happen again. Again, like, is it that I need to create an environment in which you feel comfortable enough to come to me about such a thing, even if it is scary? How can we breed a more loving environment in which like you feel safe and comfortable?
Yeah, and this is definitely a time where it can be helpful to try to invite in some just like curiosity and mutual problem solving to be like, okay, what can we do? What kind of creative solution can we come up with to make it so that, you know, sharing something like this feels both safe for you and safe for me, you know? And I think you'd be surprised, like if you bring that energy to it, like the solutions that you can come up with. At least that's been my personal experience.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, some really great insights. Even that question of like, is there anything that I could be doing to make you feel safer to share this? A lot of times the answer is like, honestly, no, you've been great, but I still have in my head these old beliefs about how partners would react to something like this, right?
Totally.
So, but still, like having that
There's an
spirit
acknowledgement
of,
there.
Yeah, like let's solve this together instead of let's figure out who's to blame for this. Right?
And one last note, just know that, you know, to avoid keeping something secret doesn't mean that you have to go the opposite direction and put it all on blast publicly. You know,
Put it on blast. What does that mean?
It's like putting you on blast.
Yeah, I think that means something different than you think
to
it means.
blast it out publicly. I'll change my words.
To just be like, this is a thing that we do.
It's not,
like you don't need to print T-shirts.
yes, it's not. And this is something that this is something
the T-shirt.
Honestly, it seems obvious, but this is something I had to learn in therapy, in learning to talk about like my own trauma and PTSD and history. Was, you know, my therapist told me that I think because of social media, we're conditioned to kind of feel like we got to do a press conference
release,
and a press release for everything that happens in our lives. But like, that's not the case. It's like you can work on sharing things that feel private or that feel secret with people who are close to you, people that you trust, people that you feel safe with. And it doesn't mean that it has to suddenly, you don't have to make T-shirts. And it doesn't have to become your identity. It doesn't have to, you know, so just wanted to put that out there as well, that it doesn't mean that, you know, choosing to share a secret or something private doesn't mean that it has to just be all out there.
Like shared with everyone in the world. Yeah, that's great. We would love to hear from all of you about how has this shown up in your relationships? I mean, this is something that people are already talking about a lot in the Patreon group and have in the past. It's just such a important topic for relationships of all sorts, really. And we would love to hear from you. Like, what are your personal stories? What are some things you've discovered about yourself through this process? Or what are some things you realize after listening to this episode that you still struggle with in terms of privacy versus secrecy? The best place to share your thoughts with other listeners is on this episode's discussion thread in our private Facebook group and Discord chat. You can get access to these groups and join our private community by going to patreon.com/multiamory. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. You can email us at info@multiamory.com, leave us a voicemail at 678-MULTI05, or you can leave us a voice message on Facebook. Multiamory is created and produced by Emily Matlack, Dedeker Winston, and me, Jase Lindgren. Our episodes are edited by Mauricio Balvanera. Our social media wizard is Will McMillan. Our production assistant is Nicole Samra. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.
Hey, this is Dan Savage from the Savage Lovecast and Savage Love. You're listening to a Swing Set podcast at Swing Set FM.
Good job there.
You want to go right on into bonus?
Go right on in.
Okay. Beep.
Whoa.
Bonus.
Also, yeah, sorry, I was like in a really weird key during MULTI,
no,
and my
it's kind of a cool harmony.
my face was like, and then
cool
Dedeker
harmony.
didn't do
Yeah, I
it.
think it worked.
Okay, quickly
It worked.
before the dog explodes.
The dog is
It's
fine.
fine.
She's looking at me is the thing. So
Looking at you with an explosive look.
so we gotta hurry it up.
She looks fairly normal.
Okay, you want to bring us in?
Noble, loyal dog.
Sure. Yeah, okay. Beep. Hey there, patrons. Welcome to yet another wonderful episode of bonus content.
This is wonderful.
We know you all
just
love
gonna
it.
let you know.
Yeah.
So part of our research for this episode, Jase came across a discussion on
What is it called? Focus on the family.
a discussion on privacy and social media for married couples from Focus on the Family. For those of you who don't know what Focus
is that
on the
the
Family
Mike
is,
Pence thing?
well, Mike Pence is a fan, and he's supported them frequently. No, Focus on the Family is run by Dr. James Dobson. It's a evangelical Christian institution that puts out a lot of media and a lot of materials. Pretty fundamentalist Christian, very anti-gay, anti-anything,
Everything.
not white heterosexual. Basically, you know the
Monogamous.
gist.
Yeah.
You know the gist. But so they, of course, had their own take on privacy within a marriage.
I did.
I really want to read like the first part of this.
I did just want to share real quick while we were talking about this and setting up the episode.
yeah.
That when we were kind of referring to different articles and things that we read and pulled quotes from, that Emily referred to this one as like the one from the family site, like the family website. It's
The family way.
The family website, you know.
What? I mean, yeah, it's, I don't know. It's
I just
fine.
thought that was because Focus on the Family to me is like such a universally known thing.
Well, I
but-
know about, it was on a John Oliver, I think. Like,
Probably. Oh,
yeah, probably. I think you
Yeah, I'm
mentioned
pretty
it, yeah.
sure. But
I remember one of my puberty books that I read growing up was made by Focus on the Family.
I'm
Oh yeah,
sure
we
it
had lots of
was.
Focus on the Family
Lots of Focus on
publications
Family
around the
stuff,
house.
yeah.
All that I know is that there were a lot of anti-abortion ads on Focus on the
site,
Family.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's where they belong.
Oh boy. Anyways, I'm going to say this beautiful quote from the beginning of this.
Do we hang on? Do
no,
we have
not
to
the
read
whole
the whole
damn
thing?
Not the whole damn thing. I just want to. I
Wait,
just.
sum it
I
up.
just.
so
I'm
good,
literally going
though.
to do this much. This much.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
do that
ready?
much. Okay.
Okay, and then, we can decide if we want to do more. But here we go. Although it's common practice for couples to maintain separate social media accounts, that's how Facebook is set up to work. We strongly recommend that they share their passwords with one another, both as a gesture of mutual respect and as a way of ensuring accountability. Eeh.
Well, okay, but here's the thing, though, to play devil's
But
advocate.
accountability buddy with your Facebook passwords?
Well, but, again, if we're adhering to this idea of don't tie your shoes in a watermelon field, like don't even do anything that suggests the appearance of something.
Don't even have your own
untoward.
self and Facebook
Yeah.
account.
I don't know. I think we talked about this ages ago with talking about social media. I think in general was, how do you feel about sharing passwords to these things or like sharing your phone unlock with your partner, which is now the new sign of commitment is like letting someone scan their fingerprints into your phone
Right.
Yeah.
so that they can
Right.
unlock your phone.
Holy shit. No, I mean, if desired, couples can prevent unwanted searches by making full use of their privacy settings.
This-
How do you even do that?
This is referring to something else. This is about not letting other people search you.
for you. Yes.
As
Which
in,
people do.
like,
Which
wait,
people
wait.
do on social media.
Really? Like,
Yeah.
if you're like, oh my God, my ex-boyfriend is on Facebook, I'm going to make sure that they can't search me.
Yeah.
Is that it?
yeah,
Yeah.
stuff like that. I think in this case they're talking more about like any random person out there can't find you and flirt with you. I think is what they're setting up here is it's like you'll only have people you really know from Bible study that would be your Facebook friends and stuff like that. And then also that like your posts won't get seen by other people so like no one else connects with you besides your spouse.
Yeah.
That's sort of what they're going for with this privacy, not from each other.
Well, it's so, I don't know how, okay. I'm going to set my feelings about Focus on the Family aside because I got a lot of them, a lot of feelings.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to set them aside. This practice of, for instance, sharing your passwords to everything with a partner, how do y'all feel about that?
I mean, I'm okay. Actually, this is something interesting, and in reading for this episode, I got kind of some more insights into this, actually, like from a legal standpoint, which is kind of interesting.
Oh.
But I would say in general, I feel like sharing a password or like the code for my phone or putting your fingerprint into it or something like that is a sign of trust. And it's specifically a sign that I trust you not to look through it. At least for me. So this is, again, just my personal experience. So to me, knowing someone's password or their login is a sign of trust. And it can be very useful because then it saves the like, hey, can you log into this if I'm trying to look something up for you? Or if we share accounts for certain things or, whatever it is, like that there's, I guess just sort of for the logistics and the convenience of it. But I think it requires a lot of trust. It's like giving someone a key to your apartment. That giving them the key to the apartment doesn't mean you can go through all my stuff, but it does mean you can come in the front door when you need to.
Like for convenience.
Right?
Yeah.
That there's not, like giving you a key to my place doesn't also, like most people would not assume that means you can then show up anytime you want unannounced either.
Yeah.
But what I was learning about and kind of reading about this is you do actually have to be as specific as you can about where you expect to have privacy and where you don't. I was specifically reading about legal cases involving spouses snooping on their spouse's computers.
Oh, interesting.
And like finding an email to, their mistress or something like that. Like the classic example of like, I was snooping and I found this.
Yeah.
And the question is, were they breaking the law or not?
Were they?
Right. Well, and the answer is it depends.
It depends on what?
Well, it depends on how much a like reasonable person, literally that's like the wording used in the laws, how much a reasonable person would feel like that was an invasion of privacy.
But
It's
I think
so subjective.
Yeah, that is incredibly subjective.
Well, so the thing that's interesting is that this was actually, if the intrusion would be highly offensive to a reasonable person. That's the wording of one of the main laws
Interesting.
used for this.
Okay.
What's interesting about it is that it's intentionally not black and white because it is so subjective, like the stuff we've been talking about, because it's not always so clear. Like, did you give them your password? Did you not? Is the computer in the living room and it's on where your kids and your spouse can access it whenever they want? Or is this in
Like
your own room?
your personal work laptop, or
Is your computer password protected to even open it, or is it not?
Yeah.
Do you leave yourself logged into your email or not? That these factors actually do matter in these court cases, where in some cases it's like, well, his computer was in the living room and like the kids also used it and she saw the letter on there. So that doesn't count as an invasion of his privacy that she looked through his email through the program that was open.
Wow.
She didn't steal a password.
Yeah.
She didn't get access to anything that she couldn't
this is from like a
reasonably-
legal standpoint.
From a legal standpoint.
This is still an asshole move.
Still an asshole
Okay.
move, for sure.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure we're not saying that, like, yeah, you should totally victim blame in every situation where someone's snooping. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. But I mean,
But it does make sense that they would take all these different factors into account and figuring
Right.
from a legal standpoint, did this person break the law or not?
well, and this is the thing that when you just asked that question, and something that I asked myself when we were working on this episode is like, my everything that I have is password protected, my phone,
Right.
and like even if my significant other looks at my phone, sometimes I'm kind of like, and not necessarily that there's anything on it. It's just kind of a like, give me the corner of my mind
Interesting.
or of myself that is mine, that I don't have to have accountability to you for, to anyone for, nobody else. Like, give me the corner of myself that is simply mine to have.
Like, give me privacy or give me death.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, to a degree, like, that's the thing. It's like, because so much of our lives now are out there on the fucking
Yeah.
internet and out there, like, for everyone to see. And, things like our phone and our computer or our journal or whatever, like, are ours.
Yeah.
And we do get to have it curated in such a way that it is specifically for us. And for other people, it does almost seem like an invasion of that if they just were given the opportunity to go through that on their own, or to look like and try to find something. Because it is always the question of like, if you're looking for something, you are probably going to find something that you don't fucking like.
Yeah.
But is that your fault or is that mine? Depending on the thing.
Yeah. I just, that reminded me of this other quote that I had pulled out that we didn't use in the episode. This is from a Supreme Court case from 2006, United States versus Gord.
Gourd, as in, didn't we say that? Discord.
Emily misspelled it in the document. Yeah. So this is a quote from the ruling on that. For most people, this is just a part of it. For most people, their computers are their most private spaces. People commonly talk about the bedroom as a very private space, yet when they have parties, all the guests, including perfect strangers, are invited to toss their coats on the bed. But if one of those guests is caught exploring the host's computer, this will be his last invitation.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that was it. Absolutely. Like, that's so true. Like Emily was saying, like, that is arguably our most private place.
Yeah.
You know, besides in our own minds, I guess, is our phones and our computers.
Yeah, because like our, you know, in some instances, our porn is on there, and pictures of our significant other that, you know, or
naked.
Yeah, naked pictures of many of our significant others, and those are on there. And not to mention like anything, just anything at all that we care about and that is ours, or that has been like given to us in a vote of confidence. And I don't know. Yeah, like, fuck you for going there. Maybe that's wrong. Like, I understand that that's not very romantic, but like, give me some autonomy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I fall similarly to where Jase falls on, like, if I give someone my password or a like ability to like look through my stuff, it's with the trust that like they're not going to. You know.
Well, okay. Yeah.
Well, and I guess I'm just realizing that from this legal stuff, obviously it's not necessarily about being able to sue someone else or not, but it's more, for me, it brought up that question of like, where do I expect privacy and where don't I? And I think that's actually a really interesting question when it comes to
what do you mean by that?
To our electronics or like things in my room. Like, for example, say I do share my password to my computer with you. It's one thing to just do that.
Yeah.
Where it's another thing to say like, hey, I'm sharing this with you. But like, you know, don't ever look through my emails or like browse through my files. Like, if you need to run a program that's right there on the desktop, that's fine. But kind of actually being explicit, which is something we talk about a lot on this show, of like, be clear about what your expectations are. Because to them, sharing their password with you, they might expect like, browse through whatever you want. It's all fair game.
So like, don't make the assumption that like your expectations of privacy are the same as this other person's expectations of privacy. Yeah,
exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and that's what so much of this like legal stuff. I went down this rabbit hole of reading about this legal stuff just because I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
But a lot of it comes down to those little things of like, well, but it was in this part of the house, or this thing was said about it, or, you know, they used the computer for this. Versus other situations where it's like, no, this was in their office. And so even though it wasn't locked, that still counted as a private space. And so therefore, it just was really interesting that it's so subjective. And I think to make it less subjective, being clear about what your privacy expectations are is a good way to go.
Can I just ask this one last damn thing and the damn focus on the family, where it's saying like, in cases, this is a direct quote, in cases where a greater degree of accountability is required or recommended, spouses may decide to set up a new shared family account instead of like, I'm assuming instead of individual accounts.
Yeah.
But I'm like, what constitutes as needing a greater degree of accountability?
I'm assuming a situation where there's been infidelity already, or a lack of trust.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's like, so, you know, we gotta look out for this person, look and make sure that they're not gonna do anything.
Right.
So we're setting up only family accounts.
Yeah, basically.
So
Or
fascinating.
only shared email accounts or whatever. Yeah.
There's very different values about kind of what a good relationship looks like.
Yeah.
Is it one where nothing ever happens that you don't know about, or is it one where you actually develop trust with each other.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
Can I tell you something, Jase? Because, okay, I feel very happy these days in that I feel like I experience a very high level of trust with both Jase and with Alex. You know, like I've pretty much like never felt the urge to snoop on either of these people because I've never felt like, oh, maybe they're hiding something from me or maybe I'm not getting the full story or whatever. However, sometimes I think about that and I'm like, but what if that means I'm just getting ultimately duped? What if Jase this entire time
The
Oh my
ultimate
has
God.
had
con
like
artist.
6 other relationships and he's just that good at hiding it that I don't even know? And okay,
I can
just,
assure you he doesn't.
just just so you know, Jase, this is not something I think about all the time. It's not regularly, but
That is
there are
some funny
sometimes
shit,
where I
though.
like almost like spiral out and I'm like, anything's possible, I guess. Like I've had my trust betrayed before, you know, anything's possible that I could just be
yeah,
like,
by
wow,
someone who definitely,
Jase, you have this whole other family in another country and I didn't know about it for 20 years. I haven't even known you 20 years.
I mean, you've had your trust betrayed by people who are way shittier than Jase.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. It is kind of funny though, is that for the most of the time I'm just basking in this like, oh, it feels so nice to have relationships where I feel like both trusted and that I can trust
Yeah.
so easily. But then sometimes that little seed of doubt where I'm like, but what if I'm just in relationships with masterminds?
Yeah, it's, you know, that theme though is like so prevalent in media of like, you know what I mean? That like the ultimate sociopath kind
Right.
of horror movie
Yes.
type situation.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? That
Wow.
that is such a common thing. So I think you're not
Or like
alone.
people leading a double life.
That you're not alone in having that
Yeah.
fear. Like clearly there's something there because like I can think of just the other day I was scrolling through Netflix and like that theme seemed to be present in quite a few of the things that came up, right? About this person seems one thing and they're actually something totally different, whether they're the protagonist or the villain
Yeah.
in either case. So yeah,
Yeah.
that is interesting. All right. Well, before Dedeker gets eaten by this dog,
This dog that's suddenly up in my face.
yeah, this dog really needs a walk. So we're all going to go do that. But thank you for joining us for this strange bonus episode about Focus on the Family and also the law and the Supreme Court and stuff like that.
Interested to hear what people's takes on this are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we look forward to hearing from you in the Patreon group, and we will see you next week.
Great. Okay, thank you for being